Hello and welcome to 3i Expert Talk Series Session 2. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to all those who are joining this session from different parts of the geographies. Today's session topic is really interesting. We will be covering what we call model ops, specifically talking about monitoring performance, the economic benefits, and the social responsibility which comes along with it. Now, if we talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning, we have been talking about different topical themes around it. And when we talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning, they have introduced new economic benefits to organizations. But apart from that, there comes an additional responsibility as well. Organizations have traditionally monitored their modeling efforts with respect to accuracy, system performance, business value. And now it's the time to look into what we call those additional checks and balances around fairness in modeling. As modeling becomes fully integrated into operational processes, there is heightened awareness as well as increasing regulation around the social responsibility with respect to modeling efforts. There is also a need to look into the investment which goes into modeling the specific resources and the cost and investments which come around it. The implementation of enhanced decision processes also has kind of serviced what we call inequalities and has helped supporting organization strategies on objectives. So today's topic, we will be covering model ops, and there will also be a short demo around what we call how this automated decision processing completely works and what are the ins and outs which comes around it. To talk about it, we have an industry expert from SAS. Her name is Jacqueline Long, and uh, people prefer calling her Jackie. She is an expert analytics professional who has an demonstrated history of working in both public and private sector in the areas of business development, analytics consulting, and consulting management. And she has implementation experience with analytics intelligence around healthcare, fraud, text mining, retention modeling, and other specific sectors. Uh, she is the principal solution architect in SAS based in Melbourne, Australia. So, Jackie, welcome to this session. We are really looking forward to your thoughts. Before I just proceed back to you, I also want to thank our knowledge partners, SAS and Intel, for helping us set up this session. And Jackie, over to you, and really looking forward to your expert thoughts around it.
Thanks so much. And that was a really good introduction, a really good summary of what's happening in the industries today, in the marketplace today, that with the introduction of AI, there are a lot more opportunities and there's a lot more economic benefit that can be realized. But the idea is with that comes some social responsibility, and that organizations are trying to take that into account. And in some senses, I would also say they're trying to get a little bit ahead of the curve because, as you mentioned, there's going to be and already is regulation around this. And there's a big
Yes.
movement with legislative things. So they're, in a sense, trying to get ahead of the curve and even try to drive what that will be. The there's always the theme of what you'll see. I'm going to show you just what there will only be a couple slides to explain what we're talking about, and then most of it is looking at how we try to accomplish this. But that their organizations are not going to do this just out of the goodness of their heart. A lot of the times it's because the regulation is driving it, and they'll want to balance it with the reason they're in business, which is to make money, is profitability. So I will walk you through this. You kind of mentioned what my experience entails. I've been working in analytics for a long time and started out with the idea of model governance and operationalizing things, and that kind of morphed into model ops because we were monitoring performance, the performance, as you mentioned, of specifically accuracy, business performance with respect to business outcomes, and also the system performance. So now we're adding some additional things that we need to take a look at, which include things like, is there inherent bias in our models or in the results of our models that we need to mitigate as part of the process? The one thing I will mention that is not completely highlighted in the demo that I go through is that you really have to, we're looking here at monitoring the performance and monitoring ways we can monitor that and ways we can insert checks and balances in our system through decisioning. But this whole new world that we're entering with social responsibility, it really needs to be embedded into every point in the process. There's a lot of things that can kind of fly under the radar. So from everything from your data prep to your visualizations, to your modeling, to your outcomes, you really have to have checks and balances all along every step in the analytics lifecycle process. So I'm going to go ahead and play this video that will walk you through how to accomplish some of this, and then I'm happy to take questions after it finishes.
Okay. And Jackie, just to mention before you
Yeah,
start, sorry about this.
no
Uh,
worries.
I'm not sure if I'm able to see your camera for some reason. So I just wanted to check uh, if you can switch it off, and I'll be off screen just to
Okay,
make sure that the focus is on the session with you.
okay. And I don't
Okay.
think I had the camera on. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye. Hello, my name is Jackie Long, and I'm with the Global Technology Practice at SAS. I specialize in the area of analytics, and I work with organizations around the globe to implement the model ops process. Digital transformation has brought the potential benefits of executing AI and ML at scale into the spotlight. But with that comes some challenges. There's also a global movement around regulations that encourage and mandate the use of responsible AI, especially around systems that impact safety, livelihoods, and the individual rights of people. The challenge becomes balancing the business profitability with that social responsibility. A significant piece of that effort is monitoring model performance from both an accuracy perspective and a fairness perspective. Today, I'm going to demonstrate how you can use SAS to customize organizational actions based on model results. This provides the opportunity to embed legislative requirements directly into the decisioning process. I'll also demonstrate how to quantify the business impact of a model. Organizations can assign a dollar amount to the business value of a model and provide business justification for the investment they're making in modeling resources. We've been talking about monitoring model performance for years, but now we can increase the frequency of that monitoring, basically to near real time if it's warranted. In addition to model performance and decay, customers can track the decisions themselves. This provides additional governance, explainability, and insight into the lineage. Finally, separating the business logic from the application accelerates deployment. In the past, an application would call a model and receive a score. Then the application applied business logic to the score to make the final decision. Now, the entire process is self-contained in the decisioning process. The application triggers the decisioning process and merely displays the results. This separation reduces the number of changes involved, the number of people involved, and the amount of testing that's required. Our goal here is to demonstrate that this will not only drive revenue today, but also prepare you for regulation tomorrow. We're going to work with a banking example here, where customers submit a loan application and receive an immediate answer as to whether they are approved or denied for that loan. What you see here is a decision flow that we have created using SAS Intelligent Decisioning. Decision flows allow you to combine business rules, conditional processing, custom code or custom processing, and modeling. As all of you know, the score provided by a model isn't the final decision as far as whether or not that loan is going to be approved. Other factors can influence the decision. In this example, the bank will consider how much the applicant has used for a deposit in the loan and how long the applicant has been employed in their current position. Customers enter basic information into a mobile app, and that app triggers this decisioning process. It executes the flow start to finish and returns the decision. All of the analytics and the business logic are driven by this decision flow. That streamlines the deployment process since you only need to update the decision when you need to make changes. You don't need to update the app at all. The first step in the decision is a business rule to evaluate the loan to value. If the applicant doesn't provide a deposit that's equal to at least 20% of the home value, the loan will be declined. A business rule might also be used to address standard exclusions or legislative constraints. This is one way that you can embed regulatory requirements into your decisioning processes. Those who meet the loan-to-value threshold undergo a credit check. This is accomplished via an API in the code note. Customers entered some data into the mobile app, things like their income, how much they plan to deposit, how much they want to borrow, how long they've been in their current job. The mobile app passes that information to the decision flow. The decision flow uses the customer ID and combines the data that the user entered with data that the organization has available in their internal databases, things like debt to income ratio or how often they were delinquent. So they're adding data on to what the customer has already provided. In addition to that, they may also combine it with external data like a credit score. So they go to a third-party vendor, access a credit score, and bring that back. All of these values, these additional values, are then input into the model itself. Code nodes are essentially a means by which you can include custom processing into your decisions. As such, code nodes like this can also be used to assess potential model bias as part of your decisioning process. The next step in the decisioning process is to execute the gradient boosting model and return a score. From a governance perspective, models can be swapped in and out simply and efficiently. You update the model, you switch it in the decisioning flow, you publish the decision, and you complete the deployment. There's no need for changes to the app. If the applicant has been employed for a year or less, they are considered to be at a higher risk for default. This means that their probability of default must be lower than someone who's been employed longer. We can see here that if someone has been employed less than a year, they can have a probability of default up to 10% and still be approved for a loan. By contrast, those individuals that have been employed for longer than a year are able to have a probability of default that is up to a ceiling of 30%. Including thresholds like this in a business rule provides a really simple way to manage and govern the thresholds that you're using. Again, regulatory requirements could be embedded using these business rules. The record context node collects all the data related to the decision in near real time. This is important because it provides immediate access to all of the performance information rather than waiting for periodic extracts. We also have immediate access to the dollar amounts and the fairness metrics associated with the decision. In fact, we have immediate access to all of the data related to the decision. We can then surface that data for analysis and higher level business decisions like, what's the ROI of this model? How much extra revenue was realized? We have 50 modelers thrashing out models day after day. Are we covering our investment in those efforts? Let me show you a couple examples. We surface the data using SAS Visual Analytics. We use standard fit statistics to assess the accuracy of the models. We have lipped across a variety of models in a model tournament, and we have lipped across time to identify degradation within a model. This is our gradient boosting model. We can also track variable drift. This allows us to trigger alerts when leading indicators look like they're changing in some manner. We can also monitor Kolmogorov-Smirnov and a Gini for each model. All of these are really standard performance reports. But remember, we also want to monitor the economic benefits and the fairness of models. The initial deposit tab displays the approval rates based on home value and loan amount requested. That 20% deposit cutoff that we assigned is pretty clear to see, but it also allows us insight into those above and below that threshold. For instance, smaller home values seem to have more of a mix or a blend of those individuals who were approved versus those who were declined, whereas the home values that have a higher value are largely approved overall. We could also drill down into this detail as necessary. We have a report around the approval rates related to our other business rule, which was the length of employment, or the job length. We can use this to identify trends and understand our base more thoroughly. One thing of particular interest would be, how might these numbers change if we targeted recent grads with some type of a loan campaign? Or how about if we targeted an underbanked population or tried to have a dedicated initiative towards that population? We'd expect to see changes in how these approval rates were falling out. I've talked a bit about quantifying business value. This next tab shows us how much money is associated with our decisions. The average loan requested by those individuals that we declined was about $370,000 versus about $280,000 for those we approved. In month 1, using this model, we potentially saved about $35 million. That's the dollar amount that's attached to those customers who will likely default. I understand this is a fairly simplistic view, and we're probably going to want to take a step further and consider the incremental value of this savings over not using any model at all. But right now, I'm just trying to demonstrate the possibilities. We can also enhance these based on the data that's available. And between the code node and the record context node, we now have a lot more data at our disposal. This is a peek at the financial side. But remember that our goal here is to demonstrate that this will drive revenue today and prepare for regulation tomorrow. Let's examine the model for potential bias. You can analyze model outcomes to verify that subgroups in your population are being treated equally. I'm not going to get into the math here, but there are accepted parameters you can use for that evaluation. Equalized odds is a fairness metric you can calculate that allows us to do just that. If we use model fit statistics that are purely based on model accuracy, there's a distinct difference in how our model predicts from a gender perspective. In this case, females are more likely than males to be approved. This alerts us that action may be needed to correct for bias. Females and males are being treated differently. Bias mitigation and how to accomplish that is a separate discussion, but this analysis detects the bias and alerts us of the need to address it. Remember, our goal is to balance social responsibility with profitability. This involves varying our cutoff points to maximize both. What's the final outcome? This last tab outlines the impact of introducing fairness. A model based purely on model accuracy returns the outcomes on the left. After we mitigate for bias, the outcomes adjust to those displayed on the right. This highlights the trade-offs, both the intangible and the hard dollars. In the instance of true positives, where the loan is approved and the customer pays in full, the bank revenue decreases by $7 billion, from $137 billion to $130 billion. And the number of customers who have had their credit expanded drops from 218,000 to 207,000. However, the false positive data, those who are approved and do not repay the loan, shows improvement in both areas. In that case, the bank loses only $6.5 billion versus 7.2. And the number of customers who are negatively impacted by the credit issues that would be involved drops from 11,500 to about 10,600. Optimal balance is accomplished by evaluating these values at various thresholds. Each organization will have a different lens into what's most important for them. Similarly, the business problem itself plays a significant role. Once you establish the optimal balance and the associated thresholds, then you can manage the model portfolio by exception, flagging only those models that are operating outside of the accepted parameters. In summary, organizations can balance fairness and profitability by introducing checks and balances along the way in the model ops process. One of these checks is achieved through model performance monitoring from an accuracy perspective in addition to a social responsibility perspective. Thanks so much for your time today. I really hope you found this demonstration useful. Now I think we're ready for questions, Kapil.
Right. So, Jackie, thank you so much. I think this was a wonderful demo in terms of actually people understanding what model ops actually does and what are the key benefits which specifically come around it. A couple of things, and this is a very basic question. So, just to let you know, Jackie, that we have three set of audiences which specifically come in these sessions. One, we have the working professionals who are people with experience in AI analytics or want to make their career in AI analytics, and then those are like from a 2 year experience to 25 years kind of an experience. Then the second set is that we have very senior leaders, thought leaders who come in, who
Okay.
already are in leadership positions, working and heading in organizations specifically around analytics and AI. And the third piece is students. Now, those students are either students who are pursuing a career in AI analytics, and then some who are already into like starting roles in organizations, right, doing an internship and so on.
Right,
So,
right.
and there are so many discussions around, I would say, uh, model ops and then ML ops and other things which come in. So a very basic question for people who are not very clear about this: what are the significant differences when we talk about model ops and ML ops? That is one thing which I just wanted to throw on the table as one of the questions which was coming in through our channels.
Okay. For me, and it may depend who you ask, what kind of answer you're going to get for this.
Right.
But for me, model ops is more all inclusive. So
Okay.
when you talk about ML ops, you're talking about machine learning and AI specifically,
Right.
where when you refer to model ops, it could be any type of model. So it could be text mining, it could be forecasting, it could be segmentation. It's any type of modeling that you're doing would be go through this same model ops process.
Okay.
Does that kind of,
Understand.
so it's more global. You know,
Got it.
ML ops would be a subset of model ops.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And the second question which is coming up to us, Jackie, is that the pre-pandemic and the post-pandemic. I understand that the post-pandemic created a lot of challenges specifically for organizations, but also from a modeling perspective, there were a lot of changes because it was a new kind of a business model altogether. There were a lot of changes which came in as part of the post-pandemic situation. So if I just talk about the model apps piece before pandemic and the model apps model ops, sorry,
Mhm.
after pandemic, what were the significant changes you experienced specifically around those?
I would say the most significant changes were around the models themselves and kind of in the deployment of the models. People were hesitant to, people knew they needed new models, that their old
Right.
models weren't performing the way they used to because, as we all know, models are data driven, and the data was changing because of COVID, because of all the different behavioral changes, market changes, economic factors changed. So the models weren't performing the way they used to. Unfortunately, you need some type of historical static data, not even static, stable data over a period of time to build a new model. And I don't think we still have that to a large extent. We haven't reached normal yet in order to have new data to create new models. So people kind of took on different approaches. Some people stopped using their models and they went back to kind of gut feel about things,
Right.
which I think that in my opinion, that would not be the most recommended, because I
Mm.
still think that just in the past 10 years, even, people have gained a lot more confidence in analytics, and they understand that gut reaction isn't always the best option. Sometimes the data driven decisions even contradict what people's guts were telling them. So a lot of people pulled the plug on their models. Other
Right.
people, which I think might have been a little, in my opinion, might have been um, a more productive route, they would increase the threshold because they knew it was riskier. The model, where they might have, say, in this loan thing, in the loan example, they
Right.
might have only accepted a threshold at one level. They would up the threshold because they knew it was riskier now. They knew their models weren't performing. So their sense of tightening them was to up the threshold slightly rather than try to rebuild something, redeploy something, because they also needed to act quickly, and that was the quickest method available for them to make changes to their system rather than redevelop something, retest something, making minor tweaks here and there. Um, some people went back to business rules.
Right.
They decided to use business rules instead of the models. Um, I don't think that's horrible. Again, people were trying to do the best with what they could and are trying to do the best with what they can in a suboptimal scenario.
Right. So,
So,
a connected question to this, Jackie, in terms of data scientists actually continue to update these models regularly due to whether internal or external demand. So, pandemic was one demand which came in. Now, how does the model ops dashboard behave in this? How do you keep that in sync with the model changes? Is there any overarching kind of a process that overlooks on both models management and model ops? How does that sync and updation specifically to these model changes? How does that work?
for me, the model monitoring of the performance of the models is an element of model ops. So the model ops, that would be a part of the model ops, and so the model ops would really serve overall to govern the performance monitoring. Is that what you mean, or did I
Yes.
misunderstand? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, yes, exactly.
So I think when we monitor the models, and I think we have to be very careful because people are very gung ho these days about retrain, monitor as soon as you see something wrong, retrain. And I think that we have to be. I think that's we want to retrain. We
Right.
sometimes want to recalibrate. We sometimes want to retire, and there are differences. Whether you're just recalibrating parameters for a model or
Mm.
whether you're introducing new variables and new algorithms to the model. The other thing to keep in mind is, um, because people want to automate things so much,
Yeah.
they talk about even retraining. Oh, we want to retrain daily. We want to retrain weekly.
Mhm.
Um, I'm not saying don't do that, but I'm saying think long and hard about when you want to do that and when that makes sense, because oftentimes you might be chasing noise. If you're retraining your model that often, you might just be chasing the noise from the latest short period of time
Yeah.
since the last time you retrained your model. So I'm all for automation. Don't get me wrong, but I think once people think automate, then they think more frequently is better. And I think it's good to get the data that often, but you
Right.
may not need to make a move about it.
Mm.
It's more keeping on top of it.
Right. Uh, the next question is more around some. So somebody is mentioning a reference to one of the leading research companies. So they did a survey in 2018 and they asked large enterprises the amount of AI adoption they would expect to deploy in the next 12 months. So the companies and the enterprises mentioned that they want to deploy AI around 23% of their systems. Then again, the next year and the next to next year, they kind of went back and checked how many of these projects were actually deployed. So they had mentioned earlier 23%, but the team actually found it is somewhere like a 5% of the AI adoptions that enterprises wanted to deploy were actually deployed. So how can model ops play is can model ops play a role in terms of increasing this percentage, or there are other ways wherein enterprises who are failing to scale AI can play a better part in terms of increasing this percentage? How can is model ops the right answer to this, or there are other ways wherein the scaling of AI for enterprises problem statement can be addressed?
I think model ops is one way, but again,
Right.
I think the thing that people are running into, and I have seen exactly what you're describing. Even when I first talk to organizations, our models in production, and then when I press them for how many models are in production, I don't know. Sometimes they tell me 100, sometimes they tell
Mm.
me 20, and when we get down to nuts and bolts, they might have 3 or 4 models in production.
Right.
So it's that last mile of deploying the model and embedding it into your operational system.
Mm.
I think that model ops plays a role in perhaps what you described a few minutes ago about keeping it operational, keeping on top of it. Model ops doesn't necessarily perform the initial deployment for you. Model ops is going to give you a process that allows that to happen and allows that to happen more quickly. And it also allows you to identify where speed bumps are in that process so that you can remove them. When you start tracking things, we talked earlier about tracking performance on models. We can also take that one step further. And if you track the entire model lifecycle process, which is part of model ops, then you start to identify where are the road bumps and where are the gaps.
Right.
Because initially, the modelers say that they're held up because of the data people. The IT people say they're held up because of the modelers. The modelers say the IT people. You know what I mean? Everybody thinks
Yeah.
it's somebody else. But
Yeah.
if you start to collect data about it, and it's a little bit everybody, let's be honest. But when you
Right.
start to collect the data around it, then you can truly identify and say, here's where it's really happening. And it might be on the handoffs when the
Right.
baton is going from one group to the other. It might be just around the approval process, you know?
Yep.
So I think it's not the one and answer, one and only answer. But yes, I think that it will provide benefit in that. But the real problem there is the deployment process that people have. We need to shorten that time to market with your model after you develop it.
Right. So from a company perspective, basically the buildup of what we call model debt in the form of undeployed, unrefreshed models in large companies where it's a big problem, model ops can actually play a key role in terms of eliminating the that what we call model debt and getting models into production, or actually realizing what all is not in production and then looking into what is the next step we need to take specifically for those models which are not in production, right? So
That's
that's a
correct.
yeah.
That's correct. The one caveat I would say is in some instances, models cannot be deployed into production because of how they were built or how complex they are.
Right.
And if they weren't built as part of a model ops process, then you may have to start over. Uh,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. Some models aren't deployed because they cannot be deployed because of the way they were written, because they're too complex, because they're relying on data that doesn't exist in production systems. So you may not be able to get all of your backlog of models into production, and you may not want to, depending how old they are.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. So Jackie, in I would say the new age organizations, uh, there is a lot of diversification in terms of the IT teams might be spread across departments, the business functions, even the business functions might have their own AI teams, right? So it's not a kind of a hub and spoke model, but more of business teams having their own AI teams, and because of that, the complexity of the organization increases. So, have you come into situations or a setup where model ops deployment has been challenging in such complex organizations? And what are the ways you have or measures you have taken to make this model ops deploying in such organization a better, a smoother one?
It's definitely complicated, and we've definitely run into those challenges. I would say that the first thing is to treat your model ops to start with a framework for an organization.
Right,
So at an organizational level, you need to decide again, to certain steps, certain milestones, certain roles and responsibilities. And so you have a almost a global or an organizational framework for the model ops. And then each of those organizations or those business units or divisions that you're describing, they may have a customized version of that that's still in alignment with corporate policy and everything, but it is customized according to the kind of work they do, according to the models they build, according to the people who they have allocated to them. So, but I will say that one of the first things that we run into that makes model ops hard is because there is no process in place at all. And people largely think there's a process in place.
right,
And sometimes it's because everyone thinks they know what the process is, but the process in my head is different than the process in your head, Kapil.
right. No,
So it's getting agreement and getting collaboration across the various, and you're right, there's a lot of roles involved now.
right,
There's the analytics lead, there's the data engineer, there's the data steward, there's the operations people, there's the application developer. So all of that needs to be really spelled out, and the handoffs and the reviews and things. And that's also, if you have all that stuff agreed upon, that's also what's going to go back to getting your things through the system and deployed into production in a more timely fashion.
right, right. So Jackie, you talked about a little bit about the teams. So can you help me understand or help the audience understand how does a typical model ops team look like, and what are the relevant or specific interactions with the various teams they would have specifically?
Sure. There's I would think of, largely speaking, probably, and I'm generalizing,
Right.
four groups of people. You're going to have the data people.
Hmm.
So you're going to have data engineers and data stewards. And data engineers are the ones who build your ETL pipelines.
Yeah.
So they're the ones who get the data from the source tables and do extract, transform, loads, build your variables, things like that. The
Right.
data stewards are more the people who govern the data, and they make sure that the standards are met, that things are using best practices, they align with policies. So those are the data people. They prepare the data, and
Right.
this is all flexible across organizations. Then you have the modelers. The modelers are going to build the models. They're going to work with the data people to get the data in the form that they need it, that's conducive to analytics. And then they are going to, once they build the models, they're going to hand it off to some type of an operations team, probably an IT team. and the IT team are the ones who deploy the models and embed them into the operational systems. Depending on the
Okay.
type of model and the type of deployment, so the consumption method for the model, and when I say consumption method, when you score the model, when you execute the model, you
Right.
use it. Are you doing it in batch? Are you doing it in real time? Are you doing it on an edge device with streaming? Are you doing it in a mobile app? Because depending how the model will be used and how it will be consumed, then you might have an application developer, which is who I was referencing in my demo, that, to some extent you want to keep them, they don't care about what the model does. They just want to know what variables to receive and what
Yeah.
things to push back and forth. Um, so when you have all those groups, when I talked about an organizational model ops process, you're going to have things like, in order for them all to work together, they need to know what each team is expecting from them and what they need to pass on. So you're going to have, on top of those folks, you're going to have a business group. The business group is the one who is requesting these models.
Right.
Now, hopefully, they're going to request a lot of models, and you can't possibly make all the models you want. So they're going to have to do some upfront work to prioritize which ones are the most important. Um, and then you're going to have handoff processes between the data people and the modelers, between the model people and the IT. And then you need to agree up front what's going to be involved in that, what's going to be expected, what kind of documentation, what kind
Yeah.
of business justification. So, yeah, there's a lot of folks involved nowadays.
Right. So then the like earlier there was this discussion around different data aspects and who exactly is the owner of that data. So then this chief data officer came into picture to look into this piece. So specifically from a model ops, then who exactly would be the owner of, I would say, the overall model ops piece? Is it the CIO or somebody else?
It's definitely going to vary from organization to organization, but I would say that, yeah, it would be the CIO.
Okay.
Because the CTO really only has a portion of it.
Right.
They've got the deployment piece of it.
Hmm.
Um, I think the CIO, again, it's going to depend because there's going to be political value battles within organizations. But if you think of functionally, who does it impact the most? It's going to be the CIO.
Hmm. No, makes sense. Absolutely. So, Jackie, any any thoughts or any recommendations, I would say, any tips or tricks you have for people who want to make their career in model ops, specifically for students or working professionals? Anything, what is the start? How should they start with? Anything which you recommend to them that this is the best way to start with and make their career in the
Ooh,
model ops?
um, my personal bias from a model ops perspective is that it's a is to not go to have a very blend have a good blend of skills. Um, so you want to understand the modeling portion, but that if you're talking about model ops, it's not
Right.
just about the modeling. You have to understand that you're modeling for a business outcome. So you have to be aware of what that means for the business and the collaboration across the multiple groups. I think what I would probably work on the most would be being able to explain the things about the model in
Yeah.
in a non in a lay, in layman's terms.
Hmm.
Like when you're working with the business,
Right.
the business doesn't care about R squares and the
Exactly.
Kolmogorov Smirnov value. They want to know, how's it impacting my bottom line? Are
Right.
those, costs above the line or below the line? Things like that.
Hmm.
So, um, to serve as a liaison across, you have to wear a lot of hats and you have to be
Right.
prepared to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I relate this thing in terms of there are three specific roles which come in. One is what we call the business translators, which you are talking about. So people who are able to know what the value a particular model will have for the business, than necessarily knowing whether it will be a regression versus random forest or some other model, because the
Yep.
business doesn't really care about that. The second
Yep.
is actually the core data scientist, people who will look into the different types of models, what are the variables, what are the other set of things which will come in to make that model more accurate. And the third piece, which is more of the back end, is the people who will take care of the different aspects of data, the ETL,
Yes.
the
Yes.
the other extraction, and the different ways sources, whether human, non-human kind of piece. So these are like three categories which I always look into segregating to like, and then looking into the different roles which will come in as part of it. So
Yeah.
absolutely, I completely agree with what you are saying.
So the one tip I might add, and this would be to
Sure.
modelers,
Right.
is um, don't get so caught up in the model itself that you lose track of why you're building it.
Yeah.
So you are building it to accomplish a business outcome, to achieve some goal. So that's what you want to focus on, is achieving that goal. And we see a lot recently where people want to create, and
Yeah.
everybody loves a challenge, the most complex, sophisticated model ever. But that's not
Yep.
always the best model
Yep.
for the purpose of what the business needs.
Exactly. No, absolutely. I completely agree with great thoughts and great set of questions coming up from the audience,
Well, good.
uh, and a very interesting perspectives which you mentioned, Jackie. We are already almost near to the time, so
Okay.
these were the set of questions which we had. Great
Okay.
demo of the solution. Any last aspect which you wanted to add before we close the session? Anything?
No, I guess the only thing I might add is that I do think the social responsibility is really an up and coming topic. We've been
Right.
getting asked about the whole ethics idea for several years now. It's kind
Right.
of coming front and center now. So if you want to choose an area of interest to concentrate in, I think that's going to be big for a while now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you for
No
your time.
worries. You're welcome.
And I'm sure the audience would have enjoyed the session as I did. Really looking forward for some interesting sessions in future. I also
Okay.
again want to thank our knowledge partner SAS and Intel for making this possible, and wishing you all the best rest of the day or the evening.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah, bye.